She was born on November 6, 15 CE, at a Roman military outpost on the Rhine River in what is today Cologne, Germany. By the time she was 43 years old, she had been the great-granddaughter of Rome's first emperor, the niece of its second, the sister of its third, the wife of its fourth, and the mother of its fifth. She had signed imperial decrees. She had received foreign ambassadors. She had minted her own face onto the coins circulating across an empire of 50 million people. In a civilization that gave women no formal political power, Julia Agrippina Minor had made herself the most powerful woman Rome had ever produced. And the son she spent 17 years engineering toward absolute power used that power on March 23, 59 CE, to send 3 armed soldiers to her private villa with a single order: kill her. Agrippina was born into the most powerful family in the world, and that family was being systematically destroyed. Her father was Germanicus Julius Caesar, Rome's most celebrated general. Man the empire openly worshipped as the future of the dynasty. Her mother was Agrippina the Elder, a granddaughter of Emperor Augustus himself, a woman so fiercely respected that she traveled on military campaigns with her husband and gave birth to 9 children across the frontier territories of the Roman Empire. In 15 and 16 CE, Agrippina watched her father lead 2 devastating campaigns against the Germanic tribes across the Rhine, pushing Roman territory deeper into northern Europe than it had ever reached. The empire called him invincible. He was 33 years old and already being spoken of as a future emperor. Then in 19 CE, Germanicus died in Antioch under circumstances so suspicious that historians have debated them for 2,000 years. He developed a sudden and violent illness within hours of receiving an envoy from Emperor Tiberius. Ancient sources record that his body showed signs of poisoning. Agrippina the Elder, his widow, named Tiberius directly as the man responsible and spent the next 8 years saying so loudly and publicly across Rome. She was 4 years old when her father died. The consequences of her mother's defiance arrived fast and permanently. In 29 CE, Emperor Tiberius exiled Agrippina the Elder and her 2 eldest brothers, Nero and Drusus, to a prison island off the Italian coast. Nero was forced to commit suicide. Drusus was starved to death in a cell. Agrippina the Elder was beaten so severely during her imprisonment that she lost the sight in one eye, before dying of starvation in 33 CE. Agrippina the Younger was 14 years old when her mother died on that island. She had already been married for 1 year. The marriage had been arranged by Tiberius himself in 28 CE, when Agrippina was 13 years old. Her husband was her own first cousin, Gnaeus Domitius Ahenobarbus. Ancient sources describe him as one of the most thoroughly despicable men of his generation. He pulled out the eyes of a business rival in the Roman Forum. He deliberately drove his chariot over a child on the Appian Way, accelerating rather than stopping. He murdered an enslaved man for refusing to drink as much as commanded. He was somewhere between 30 and 50 years old on their wedding day, and Agrippina had no choice in the matter. In 37 CE, Emperor Tiberius died, smothered with a pillow by a politician when he unexpectedly regained consciousness from a coma. Agrippina's brother Caligula became Rome's 3rd emperor. Within months, she was elevated alongside her 2 surviving sisters to unprecedented honors. Her likeness appeared on imperial coinage. Her name was included in the loyalty oaths sworn across the empire. In 37 CE, she gave birth to her only child, a son she named Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus. The world would come to know him as Nero. Her husband reportedly looked at the newborn and remarked that nothing produced by himself and Agrippina could possibly be good for the state. He was right about the child. He was wrong about who would do the damage. In 39 CE, Caligula uncovered a conspiracy to remove him from power. Agrippina and her sister Livilla were implicated in a plot involving a man named Marcus Aemilius Lepidus. Caligula had Lepidus executed, He sold every object Agrippina owned at public auction, kept the proceeds personally, stripped 2-year-old Nero of his inheritance, and exiled Agrippina to the Pontine Islands, the same prison chain that had consumed her mother. She was 24 years old, a widow after her husband died of dropsy in 40 CE, completely stripped of wealth and status, raising a toddler in exile on an island in the Tyrrhenian Sea. She had already lost her father, her mother, 2 brothers, her wealth, her freedom, and her child's future. What she had not lost was the one thing that would prove more dangerous than any of them, her patience. On January 24, 41 CE, Caligula was assassinated in the underground corridor of the Palatine Games by a group of Praetorian Guard officers who had grown tired of his cruelty. He was 28 years old and had ruled for 3 years and 10 months. The guards stabbed him 30 times. They also murdered his wife, Caesonia, and his infant daughter Julia by smashing her head against a wall. The Senate spent approximately 2 hours debating whether to restore the Republic before Caligula's paternal uncle Claudius was found hiding behind a curtain in the palace and proclaimed emperor by the Praetorian Guard. Agrippina was recalled from exile immediately. She returned to Rome with almost nothing. Nero was 3 years old. For 7 years, Agrippina rebuilt herself with a discipline that ancient sources found either admirable or terrifying, depending on who was writing. She remarried a prominent and wealthy senator named Gaius Sallustius Crispus Passienus, who was already married when Claudius requested on her behalf that he divorce his wife and marry Agrippina instead. He did. He was also said to be one of the wittiest and most influential men in Rome at the time. She persuaded him to name Nero as his heir. He died in 47 CE under circumstances that contemporaries immediately and widely attributed to poison administered by Agrippina herself. She inherited his fortune entirely. At 32 years old, she was wealthy, independent, politically networked, publicly admired, and for the first time in her adult life, completely free from male constraint. She used that freedom to aim directly at the most powerful man in the world. Emperor Claudius was 58 years old, a widower since the execution of his disgraced wife Messalina in 48 CE, and politically vulnerable. He walked with a limp, spoke with a stammer, and had spent most of his life being treated as an embarrassment by the Julio-Claudian dynasty. He was also, crucially, Agrippina's paternal uncle. Roman law explicitly prohibited marriage between niece and uncle. Agrippina did not consider this an obstacle. She used what ancient sources describe as calculated physical proximity, exploiting the formal privileges of a niece to position herself beside Claudius at public events and private dinners, and within months she had moved from niece to something else entirely. In 49 CE, a senator named Lucius Vitellius made a formal speech before the Roman Senate, arguing that the marriage of an uncle to a niece was not only legal, but advantageous to the empire. The speech had been arranged in advance. The Senate approved the union. On January 1st, 49 CE, Agrippina married Emperor Claudius and became Empress of Rome. She was 33 years old. It had been 10 years since Caligula sold her furniture and exiled her to an island. What followed was the most concentrated exercise of female political power in the 800-year history of the Roman state. Within 12 months of the wedding, Agrippina had secured Claudius's adoption of Nero in 50 CE, making him the emperor's legal son and heir. She arranged the betrothal of Nero to Claudius's biological daughter, Claudia Octavia, locking her son's succession claim through 2 separate legal instruments simultaneously. She received the title Augusta, making her a living divine figure, the first empress to hold that title during her lifetime rather than posthumously. She attended Senate sessions behind a separate curtain to hear and influence deliberations without formally violating the rule against women on the Senate floor. Her face appeared on coins minted across the empire, positioned face to face alongside Claudius rather than on the reverse side, an arrangement without precedent in Roman numismatic history. She had Claudius's freedman Narcissus, one of the most powerful administrative figures in Rome, removed from influence. She had rivals convicted of invented charges. She managed the empire's eastern frontier negotiations. Ancient sources record that foreign ambassadors sent to Rome specifically requested meetings with Agrippina rather than Claudius. The man whose name was on the throne was no longer the most powerful person sitting beside it. Then in 54 CE, Claudius began reconsidering his succession arrangements. He started spending private time with his biological son Britannicus, now 13 years old, and several sources record that he spoke openly of restoring Britannicus as his primary heir. Claudius was 63 years old. He had been emperor for 13 years. He had perhaps 5 or 10 more years remaining. Agrippina had perhaps 5 or 10 months before everything she had spent 15 years constructing was legally dismantled by the man she had married to build it. On October 13th, 54 CE, Claudius died. Ancient sources are divided on whether death came from natural causes or from a plate of poisoned mushrooms served by Agrippina at dinner. The Roman historian Tacitus records 3 separate versions of the poisoning, noting that the method varied across sources, but the conclusion did not. Agrippina kept his death secret for 6 hours, while she positioned Nero's supporters at the palace gates. At noon on October 13th, 54 CE, the palace doors opened and 17-year-old Nero stepped out to meet the Praetorian Guard. The guard commander asked him for the customary password. Nero gave the answer Agrippina had chosen for him. The password was the best of mothers. For 4 years after Claudius's death, Agrippina and Nero maintained a tension that the Roman historian Tacitus described as a slow and mutual unraveling. Nero was 17, then 18, then 19, then 20, and with each year he moved further from the obedient son she had engineered and closer to something she no longer controlled. He removed her Praetorian Guard escort. He stripped her of her palace quarters. He eliminated her allies from senior government positions one by one. By 58 CE, Agrippina had been reduced from co-ruler of a 50 million person empire to a private citizen living in a villa outside Rome, still formally his mother, formally still alive, and formally still dangerous. Nero decided those 3 conditions could not continue simultaneously. On the evening of March 19th, 59 CE, he invited her to a seaside banquet at Baiae, embraced her warmly at dinner, and personally escorted her to a boat he had prepared for her return journey across the Bay of Naples. The boat had been constructed in advance with a weighted ceiling designed to collapse on command. She was approximately 300 meters from shore when the mechanism released. The ceiling fell. Her attendant, Acharonia, mistaking herself for Agrippina in the water and calling out that she was the empress, was beaten to death by oars. Agrippina swam to shore. She was 43 years old. She had survived exile twice, 2 hostile emperors, 1 conspiring brother, and the collapse of nearly everyone she had ever trusted. She had built the Roman Empire's succession with her bare hands across 2 decades of calculated, relentless, morally devastating ambition. She made it to the beach and sent word to Nero that she was alive. He sent 3 soldiers to finish what the boat had not. When they arrived at her villa on March 23rd, 59 CE, Agrippina reportedly pulled aside her clothing, pointed to her abdomen, and told the soldiers to strike her there, in the womb that had produced so abominable a son. They stabbed her multiple times. She died on the floor of the villa she had retreated to after a life spent inside the most powerful corridors on earth.